I'll begin with my Shakespeare quote. Brevity is the soul of wit. Thank you very much. I love it here. I really do appreciate that introduction, and most importantly, the invitation to join such a distinguished and fine group of folks to talk about a very important subject. As Joel mentioned, just one footnote, I was actually 13 when diagnosed, and that's when I realized the need for information and support. But at 18, as luck would have it, thanks to one strongly worded form rejection letter from Harvard, I was at Babson College, 6.9 miles down the road, and it was 3 o'clock in the morning, second week of school. I lay in my bed, miserable, feeling vulnerable, wondering where everyone else in this world with arthritis was. Got out of bed, emailed my former internship boss, and in one sentence said there's got to be a way to bring people together in a positive environment where we could share strength and experience. Well, he wrote back he'd like to become a social entrepreneur. Why don't we do this together? And that afternoon, CreakyJoints became a website. And I'm pleased to report, thanks Viveka. Here we are 18 years later. I'm close to Harvard, but still not there. CreakyJoints has more than 100,000 members, and I no longer sleep in a bunk bed. So mission accomplished there. We have the Herculean task of talking about biosimilars and what it means from the patient perspective. This is no easy task. I'm going to take the following 7 slides, literally, to walk you through our perspective, our viewpoint on the subject. Because the reality is, what biosimilars mean to patients is very little right now, if anything. I mean, literally, you walk down the Comm Ave here, and if you asked 100 people what the word biosimilar means, you'd get nothing. You'd actually probably do better asking them to perform a joint count, which they could figure out how to do, than define what biosimilar is. And, you know, as we've kind of, as we've alluded to at AdComs, at FDA, and as we talk a lot, and, representing such a robust and growing community of patients with all forms of rheumatic diseases, RA being one of the most prevalent, and biologics being some of the most useful therapies that these folks have ever encountered. We say this, the science is important, the medicine is important, but at the end of the day, acceptance and use is what's going to measure success. And that is the focus we'd like to share with everybody today. And we've got a couple of ideas. We have a program called Operation Biosimilar Confidence. But before that, I just want to show you lots of tiny print and a map with all kinds of colored states that effectively shows our investment and interest in the subject of biosimilars at the state level from an advocacy standpoint, helping to provide that patient perspective within the legislatures and regulatory bodies who are making these decisions around ways in which patients will access these therapies so that they understand what these therapies mean to us. And it could be summed up in this very simple anecdote. When we got started long ago, we used to hold patient events. We still do, to a lesser degree, but we would hold patient events, and we'd usually set for 100. And the instructions to the meeting planners were, right before the event, it was protocol, just pull the front 25, the front right quarter of chairs. Why? To make room for those who can't walk, to make room for the wheelchairs. This was just standard protocol included in what to do for the event. Well, today, if we have one wheelchair at an event, it's a lot. It's the outlier. And I can't think of a better way to summarize the impact that biologics have had on our lives than that story. And as importantly, yeah, absolutely. And to all of your credit, and for all of our appreciation to the work that you all do. And so when we think about biosimilars, we think very positively. We think about what comes next and how that's going to impact us in the equivalent way, and we're excited for it. So as I mentioned, Operation Biosimilar Confidence is a program we are now rolling out as an organization that will nurture collaborative advocacy with all kinds of stakeholders to do just that, instill confidence among patients and their families living with these diseases and who are treated by these drugs. So what is the purpose here? Ultimately, it's to provide information about biosimilars to patients, physicians, and their families so that everyone understands the biosimilars' clinical value, their scientific foundation, and the rigorous development and review process that's undertaken to approve them. You know, this is just truly, truly important to us because our need for understanding what this means trumps, sorry for that word, trumps the perceptions and the perspectives and the projections that we as people living with these diseases might have. And it's really important that we have a foundation of knowledge and information that we can base these projections and these thoughts and feelings on so that we're not ultimately psychologically intervening here in all of the rigor and all of the process that we've been hearing about all day. Now, the objective of Operation Biosimilar Confidence is, of course, to educate patients about biosimilars, to create a positive, benefits-oriented biosimilar message towards patients and caregivers, to equip us, patients, to talk confidently with our physician about biosimilars, to ensure that patients receive the financial as well as medical benefits of biosimilars. And at the end of the day, as I keep reiterating, confidence is key to success. And we believe that confidence can be measured across a few attributes. And this is what we want to begin exploring as we, first phase of this, begin probing and understanding from a qualitative standpoint what the various stakeholders think and feel about it. But as importantly, for the patients to understand three key components, and four if you add cost savings. And that's the manufacturer's safety track record, the biosimilar supply chain reliability, and the available support services. I know we talked a little bit about this morning, the fact that generics don't have the equivalent patient support programs, and the projection is theoretically biosimilar manufacturers won't either. We will not accept that. We are going to do everything we can as patients to advocate for a continuation and a congruence of the support programs that we rely on as patients. And so to take just a closer look at these four areas, we would like to have a close look at the safety record of the manufacturers. This is going to be important to patients. By the way, this is all patient-derived. We bring our, thank you, Dr. Woodcock, for nodding in agreement and not asleep, because that is, that's very reassuring. Because when we ask our community of patients, what's it going to take to make you confident about biosimilars when they come to market? And they listed the fact that they want to make sure that the manufacturers know what they're doing and have the record to prove it. They want to make sure that the supply chain is available for them. We lived through the Enbrel shortage. Our phones blew up and our email boxes exploded with people who were extremely frustrated and really at wit's end on that. And we have the opportunity now, as we project out to biosimilars, to hopefully prevent that from ever happening again. The patient support services, again, as I mentioned, is super critical. And we're talking phone support, website resources, social media presence. It's important. Copay support programs, the navigation with the payer, as well as the public and in-office educational materials and presence. It's just necessary. And to think that we can get away with biosimilars without some of these attributes, especially on the patient support program services, is, I think, a massive oversight that will, again, lead to something a little less than that acceptance and acknowledgement and use and approval by the patients themselves. And then finally, payer ethics, which is, a little bit of an ironic term there, because what we want to do is ensure that cost savings hit the patient at some level. Because if they're taken by a middleman to the middleman to the middleman and never seen at the patient's shoulders or pocketbooks or wallets, then at the end of the day, it's useless and meaningless to us. So we plan to do this first of all, by talking directly to patients. And we have a lot of work to do. We started this in 2001. I was very privileged. I believe I was the first patient up at the very first hearing on this in that big, great room in Maryland, talking about a whole host of issues. Obviously 5 years later, we're at the kind of dawn of the next era related to this issue. And we have to continue, if not, I can make the argument, talk more about it with patients so that the comfort level and the understanding of biosimilars is very much ingrained. And the differences, for example, between a biosimilar and a generic. These are the nuances that are so critical and something that has to be done. We have to talk directly and indirectly to employers and employee advocacy groups. We have to let these big self-insured employers understand, again, what the perspective of the patient is and what life is like thanks to these medicines and why biosimilars are a critical component to the success in living with these conditions. We definitely have to talk more to the media. We have to talk to bloggers. We have to talk to people who have public influence so that the conversation and the narrative is written from the patient's point of view. We cannot allow Wall Street Journal business analysts to dictate the conversations about biosimilars. Why? They're looking at one thing and only one thing. Thanks. And they're ignoring this is the friends and family table here. Thank you. And they're ignoring the patient perspective on what this means. And finally, we have to work closely with payers and doctor groups and manufacturers, of course, to ensure the smooth integration. I want to be crystal clear here. We can't wait for biosimilars. I mean, bring it on. We want them. We are accepting of this next generation in as much of an embraced way as possible. We are thrilled to see this next generation of technology reach our medicine, our veins, and our bodies. But if we don't do it right, it's going to get really messy. And it's going to get really ugly out there. And all this work that's gone in for the last 5 years and arguably 20 years before that is going to get upended. It's going to get disturbed and disrupted, and for the wrong reasons. And so from the patient standpoint, we have a very important role in this. We are more and more educated than we've ever been. We are more and more directly in touch with reality, and sometimes alternate reality, as we've ever been. And in saying that, I think that we can be, patients, a very valuable and a very important component and partner to the introduction, the adoption, and the success of biosimilars because we want them, we need them, and we're relying on them. And so we want to do our part. And that means having a close look at some of these areas of benchmarking so that we can have a better understanding of who is who and what is what. But also for us to embrace biosimilars in the most responsible way possible. I also wanted to add one other component to biosimilars. And I think what is going to make or break it is the inclusion and the integration of as much evidence as possible about this. Look, randomized clinical trials are great, but as a PCORI-funded patient-powered research network, PI, called Arthritis Power, you like that plug? I can tell you that RCT data is the furthest thing from humanity and personality that it gets. And when it comes to including real-world evidence, whether it's from a registry, which is super important, from patients themselves through some validated instruments like PROMIS and others, whatever that is, we have to have a closer eye to all of the information we have. Look, we're at the intersection of information, communication, science, medicine, and technology. It has, when all these rich white people were living, yeah. Anyway, when all these people were, I don't want to get us sidetracked, when these folks were alive, when this building was built, and when all this happened, they didn't have the technology. They didn't have the communication. They didn't have the medicine or the science. We have the ingredients for success. And that means the longitudinal data of registries like Corona. That means figuring out how to integrate EHR and EMR data in the future, because it's right at our fingertips, although somehow still out of reach. Taking in information from patients through their registries and synchronizing all of it so we have a crystal clear picture and we understand what that future is going to look like with as much confidence as possible. To everybody, we say, bring it on. You know, this is really something that we're very excited about, and again, very thrilled to be included. So I started with the Shakespeare quote. Let me end with one. Is that cool? I don't have it memorized the way Joel seemingly did, but this one's from The Merchant of Venice, because I thought it would be appropriate. If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? And if you wrong us, shall we not revenge? Thank you.